This is a message for the world, you might say, but it is directed to Marius Ziganari, who is working with Refugee at the refugee camp, the Nakivale refugee camp in Uganda, Africa. So it is it is the earliest refugee camp established in Africa. It's one of the largest. Maybe around 79,000 people are living there at this time from multiple countries. And of course, getting enough food to eat and living a decent life is difficult in a refugee camp, some more so than others. And so Marius is working with the people there for food production. And so I have a few ideas for him here based on my knowledge of permaculture and regenerative agriculture. So I'm just going to go through a few of these. So the goal is to use every bit of organic resources that come into the settlement. Everything is recycled. They do have trees and forests in their neighborhood, and the area is being gradually deforested for firewood and charcoal. So what is needed, one of the things you'll see in the photos, if you look up Nakivale refugee camp, you can find lots of photos of it, and you'll see there are some trees in the neighborhood, but the streets are relatively wide and have usually very few, if any, trees on them. If all the streets could be planted to fruit trees and firewood trees at spacing, it would cool the whole settlement, make it much nicer to be in, and produce a lot of firewood and food for the people. All the water that falls on the place, there's a lot of water runoff. All the water is valuable. The water should be captured in rain gardens, roof catchment systems, and infiltrated into swales and basins so that it infiltrates into the groundwater and is held in the ground for the agroforestry, food forest, and the gardens of the place. There is a fair amount of room for gardening, but keeping up soil fertility is difficult. So they need to be growing a lot of green, crops that not only produce food but produce biomass for improving the soil. One thing for them to look into is grow biointensive double dug gardening. It's one of the fastest ways to increase your yield. They use firewood a lot. All that ash can be utilized in the gardening. It's a source of minerals and potash. Any kitchen waste, which I doubt there's little, but there's always some kitchen waste, and if it could be fed to chickens before the manure is used back into the garden, you get an extra yield. There is a certain amount of swamps in the area, and there's what we might call water weeds. There's also things that they use for basketry and for weaving. So improving the vegetative cover of the wetlands and creating more wetlands so that lots of productive plants can be grown there. If there's malaria in the area, I assume there is, they should be growing Artemisia annua and Artemisia afra, two plants that really mitigate against malaria. So growing their own herbal medicines. Papaya and banana grow well there. They're really fast-producing plants. There's a thing called a banana circle where you have a shower in the middle of a bunch of bananas. And all the shower water feeds the banana circle and all the fertility. Live fences, which are really small, narrow, woody stem plants that make boundaries for fields, etc., could produce a fair amount more material. And knowing all the weeds. There are a lot of edible weeds in any situation. There's a certain amount of weediness there. What are all the edible weeds, and what are the best edible weeds that can be grown in the area? They should be strewn around the neighborhood and increase the amount of edible weeds and medicinal weeds in the system. They should have tool libraries where they can share tool. Growing vines up the sides of buildings and on rooftops is one of the places they can grow the most food the quickest. It's right where they live. The water runoff from the roofs can feed the vines. And you can have at your drip line, you can have mounds of soil at the drip line where you plant the vines that go up the sides of the building and onto the roofs. This is mainly things like squash, loofah sponge, melons, other types of vining plants. In the area, there's degrading land, and around any refugee camp in the world, any degrading land in the neighborhood should be utilized by the lots of labor in the camps to do ecosystem restoration, to produce more useful trees, plants, etc. So ecosystem restoration employs part of the people and increases production for them. Instead of reducing and forests and instead of degrading environments, refugee camps should be used to upgrade and restore all the land around them. There's a wide range of plants that can be grown, and more research should be done on which plants produce the most value for a small unit area that can be grown there with the current resources. One of the big resources in any situation like this is going to be the human poop and pee. There's a lot of biomass there. How is it being, a lot of times it's a pollutant and a danger and disease in the system. How can it be utilized in the safest way to then be turned back into fertility for the system? So there's also a lot of lakeside around. There's Lake Nakivale is adjacent to the camp, and the camp extends right to the lake shores. There are things called Chinampas. So research should be done on Chinampas. It's an old system of building peninsulas and small islands and shallow waters of lakes for food production, sub-irrigated food production. And the Aztecs mastered the art of this. So Chinampas would be probably part of their solution. So these are just a few ideas of what can be done at Camp Nakivale. Now, there are many, many refugee camps around the world, and if these kinds of ideas could be applied to refugee camps around the world, they can grow more of their own food, have a more decent lifestyle, a little bit of better living conditions, more tree cover, and the Ecosystem Restoration Alliance is putting together a study group or action group to help advise refugee camps on these kinds of systems. And so if anybody out there is working with refugee camps or coming up with systems that would be useful in these situations, we'd like you to get in touch with us. You could just start with emailing me, friendsofthetrees@yahoo.com. You can go to Global Earth Repair Foundation.org website, and gradually we will put more information like this up there. So good luck to all the people in the refugees in the world, of which about one fourth of the refugees in the world live in refugee camps, and many are just spread amongst populations. And there's certainly a lot more Ukrainian refugees out there right now. So our hearts go out to all the refugee people in the world, and let's create a world that's restored and doesn't need refugee camps. Thank you very much. This is Michael Pilarski, over and out.